Hey, so I'd like to communicate something that has come up a few times with our world being what it is now on July 5th of 2022. There have been some Supreme Court decisions that have affected democracy. At least they've affected women's rights, and yeah, it seems to be playing into a bit of a fear for a lot of people that we're heading towards more of a kind of proto-fascist handmaiden's tale kind of scenario. And I don't know, maybe we are. That would be awfully terrible. And I think for everybody, even if you're one of the privileged children of such a family, I can't imagine a worse fate. I mean, except for to be anyone else in that society, right? But it's helpful for, at least it's helpful for me, and I found it to be helpful for some other people, um, to have a psychological lens that'll give you a little bit of an option here, because there's a defensive mechanism that often needs to be interpreted in an intimate relationship, in a family relationship, at work, I don't know, in society, in relationship to greater forces in society. Um, to know what's happening, because it fits. Like it's a fairly obvious interpretation once you think about it, and that is to see some of the dynamics of the sort of authoritarian or nationalist conservative movements as engaged in a type of projective identification. Now, there is no question that projective identification is what many people on the, I guess, moderate right, or whatever that means. Someone that's not just wanting to go, you know, commit acts of violence, strong acts of violence against the government, like apparently 47% of strong GOP folks feel like they may need to do sometime soon. You know, people that are maybe not socialized, educated, or even maybe they have been and they still disagree with some of the messages of the activist voices on the left. They're experiencing projective identification of a kind of different sort. Projective identification sort of operates as a bit of a hall of mirrors in a lot of relationships. We talk about mutual enactments where what someone is doing to someone else is then projected onto that other person, saying, look at how you're putting me in this situation where I have to react in this way. And then it leads that person who's encountering this dynamic to then act in that certain way. That's justifying this whole cycle. And, it gets messy. Being a human in relationship is tough work, because, if we're going to actually bring any thoughtfulness to um, these undercurrents, it requires binocular vision. Um, and, if one of those binoculars is like a finger poking in your eye, especially if you grew up in an environment where, you were conditioned by this sort of thing, where the subjectivity of somebody else and their neurotic state was experiences nothing but a projection, or conversely, um, if you're raised in the image of your also well-meaning parents' false image, to be sort of a continuation of their dreams and their existential woes, resolution of those woes. The subjectivity of others can be poison. It can be toxic. It can feel like abuse. Even like I say, the more covert kind of exploitation of a child who's raised to think anyone who says this about you, well, that's because this person doesn't understand the virtue of your childhood egocentricity and grandiosity, just as they don't understand ours. And so they're the outgroup, the scapegoats, the people that are sick and bad and terrible. And this type of projection of of a type of, very, in fact, toxic immaturity, and even the toxicity and the ugliness of raising a child in this way, that can be projected outward onto others. So, this whole cute business with the notion of all sort of educated liberals being pedophiles. I mean, it's tremendously disturbing that people listen to this and think it's true, but it's a projection. It's like a dream interpretation. What does that mean to do something like this, so terrible to a child, that's going to stick with them and break their selfhood in such a profound way that they'll be forever damaged. Well, what if the person that's hearing the story about somebody else that's criticizing them and their brokenness, here's this conspiracy. It's like, that's what it is. I'm facing this enormous sort of evil out there, and I'm the hero in it, and I have to stand up, and it justifies being psychotic. And I'm not actually psychotic. I'm living in this monstrous world. This is psychology, okay? It's wacky how, as they said in The Elephant Man, the mind will do somersaults to preserve its solution of happiness, or perhaps ego, integrity, lovability, the future where one isn't going to be seen as the baddies, Sorry to quote Mitchell and Webb, when the Nazi soldiers were, are we the baddies? Yeah, well, maybe if you realize that, history won't be so kind, you're actually facing, at least unconsciously, you're staring into the future with this premonition that you will be oppressed and targeted and, tarred and feathered by society. And, well, you might be right. Just because it's happened to all of your ancestors who passed down the same sorts of messages. They didn't age so well for them. And even though you may think slavery is kind of a bad thing, the idea, if you look like me, your ancestors probably would have seen that attitude as blasphemous. So, looking forward, someone that's embracing, strong, nationalistic, utopian views of how great it will be to move to a one-party system, and just look at the Wikipedia's entries for, fascism, and you'll see the anti-intellectual, anti-liberalism, one-party state. This notion of, and I really liked what they said about this sort of dialectic of egomania and submission. Need an election endorsement. Anyhow, looking into that future, it looks kind of bleak, and unfortunately, people who have vulnerabilities can be easily seduced into these twisted narratives about the forces of good and evil in our world. I think indeed that is the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil. It's where you switch them around, and hopefully the good news about the fruit of knowledge of good and evil is there's also knowledge of good that comes from it. And I think that this type of an interpretation sort of is a piece of that. I'm not claiming to be the prophet of it, insofar as a prophet's anything other than just the emergence of truth in the human psyche, of insight leading to growth. And it's a dangerous business. But it's way more dangerous to be on the side of subjugation, at least at this time in history, because it's so close to being exposed. And it's being exposed in a fairly ruthless and unthoughtful way, I would say. It's not Satyagraha with which we meet these individuals who invade capital and shoot up mosques. It's maybe not even possible to be humble. But we can at least understand, for one, that it's a result of forces that are greater than the individuals, at least what's left of the actual personhood of those individuals, living in the dream of the false personality, living in the dream of the, I should say, the distorted narrative of the personality that causes it to see this type of reactionary, militaristic denunciation of commentary as evil itself. Perhaps it's wisdom, perhaps wisdom's a good thing. But really the main point I wanted to speak to was the experience of the world through the Handmaid's Tale sort of lens. You're living the dream projected by the individuals who are terrified of the unmaking of their integrity and the revelation of their iniquity, of their sin, you might say. And they really don't see it that way. In fact, it's very offensive to be called out for being some kind of a molester of the sanity of children when you're just doing what you're told and teaching them the legacy from which you were conditioned, carrying it forward. It's something that such individuals would obviously seem to want to fight against. And so when we feel like it's so bad, the future is so bleak, we'll just consider that here we are talking about it. And there are people that you love. And the genie's out of the bottle. Democracy exists in the world. Women have spiritual legitimacy. It's something other than a helpmeet or something to be put down, and that's true for the feminine in all of us. When Elvis started shaking those hips, guess what? Something deep inside those who were inspired by that knew this was all a sham, this scapegoating business, this whole militaristic culture that cracks down on that. It's wrong. And so the fact that we can say these things and see these things, and actually are at a pretty good vantage right now to make a more informed psychological response to the cultural wars than simple, sword beating, or protests that are bound to, not be seen as legitimate displays of First Amendment rights when they start to become violent or dehumanize the entirety of the police, or we need a smarter approach, and I would start with this: if you are living in a world that is the projective identification of those who are doomed to face the future of their own Dante's Inferno, you're probably doing it wrong. binocular vision. Here's what the future looks like when we put on our opponent's projective binoculars. Here's a reality of being a person who's allowed dignity, that's not living in such a totalitarian state, who, if, God forbid, one day one finds oneself in such a state, hopefully there will be a means of leaving and not having to be just engaged in this neurotic fight. And I'm not saying it's not worth a fight, but we should get to know how to see our freedom, how to even see the freedom of the relative freedom of those that we are so aware of being oppressed. Those who don't have access to funds to travel for an abortion, those who are being placed in religious schools where they will be taught propaganda. Those who are living in abusive homes and relationships without a real way out. Many people live without freedom, and yet in this moment we are free to see that. And therefore we don't live in the handmaid's tale. Democracy is a process of becoming. It's a fight. Taking on that projective identification is game over. It's the end of democracy for the individual soul. We have to meet each other heart to heart and have boundaries with those who cannot. And be mindful of the words we speak. But also have faith that there's something so incredible in each of us. And it yearns to find expression. And it even yearns to make amends with those who are willing. And I hope those numbers will increase as we see this dystopic vision coming closer to the surface. It's not a good thing, but it is good to take a step back and see our great privilege to reflect on and talk about these things with one another, and to honor each other's experiences, even when they sometimes require two sets of eyes.